The second model that we are going to discuss is about Backman's and Palmer's model of communicative competence. Lyle Backman introduced communicative language ability, CLA, which involves knowledge of the language and its appropriate use in a given situation. It comprised of organizational competence and pragmatic competence. The image that you have in front of you, it shows you the components of the first model, which was introduced in 1990. Language competence, according to Backman, consisted of organizational competence and pragmatic competence. Now, under organizational competence, you have grammatical competence and textual competence. Grammatical and textual consisted of vocabulary, morphology, syntax, phonology, graphology, and textual competence. You have cohesion, rhetorical and conversational organization. Then pragmatic competence consisted of elocutionary competence and social-linguistic competence. Here you have this particular competence further divided into or consisted of ideational function, manipulative functions, heuristic functions, imaginative functions, and social-linguistic competence. We have the sensitivity to different or differences in dialect or variety, sensitivity to difference in register, sensitivity to naturalness, and ability to interpret cultural references. Now, this was the first model which was introduced by Backman in 1990. In 1996, Backman and Palmer revisited this model and made minor changes, mostly in nomenclature. In their view, Backman and Palmer used the term knowledge instead of competence. It's very important that we should know that there is a difference between knowledge and competence. Knowledge is about having the understanding of any information, and competence refers to or is related to having skill. So competence is skill specific, whereas knowledge is acquiring of information. Backman explains language ability as involving two components: language competence, or what we will call language knowledge, and strategic competence, which we will describe as a set of metacognitive strategies. So, two important things. One is the language, and second is the strategic competence. So we saw that Celsi-Masya, they focused on discourse, and then Canalian-Swan's focus was on social linguistics. Now, this particular model focuses on metacognitive strategies. Let's try to understand the changes that took place in the second model, which was introduced by Backman and Palmer. So this was what it was in 1990, and we have discussed that. And this was which was introduced in 1996 and further modified in 2010. Now here you see that language competence was changed into language knowledge. Therefore, the organizational competence was also changed into organizational knowledge. When we are talking about grammatical knowledge, which are under these subheadings, we see that according to this, grammatical knowledge is needed to construct accurate sentences or utterances and include knowledge of vocabulary, syntax, phonology, and graphology. Knowledge of vocabulary is something that includes single words and compound words. Knowledge of syntax is basically to do with the knowing or understanding of syntax, referring to the rules which govern the ways words are combined to form sentences. And knowledge of phonology and graphology basically is related to the phonology governing the structure of words. The phonological features of language are often divided into two categories called segmental or suprasegmental phonology. Graphology, sometimes called spellings or orthography, refers to the way sounds of spoken language can be represented in written or printed symbols. Then we have textual knowledge. Basically, the textual knowledge, we have knowledge of cohesion and knowledge of rhetorical or conversational organization. Now, according to Backman, this knowledge of cohesion is involved in producing or comprehending the explicitly marked relationship among sentences and written text, or among utterances in conversation. So cohesion is something that brings about the logical understanding of the sentences and their logical relationship of these sentences within a written text as well as the spoken utterances. Knowledge of rhetorical conversation, according to Backman and Palmer, is the conventions for sequencing units of information. And in conversation, it refers to the way interlocutor manages the conversation, for example, by taking turns. So this conversational organization has to do with how people or participants take their turn. Then we have pragmatic knowledge from pragmatic competence too. And that refers to basically the function of the language, and one should have the functional knowledge, consists of knowledge of ideational functions, which means this function including the use of language to inform or to express or to exchange information about ideas, knowledge, feelings. Then knowledge of manipulative function basically consists of three types: instrumental, regulatory, and interpersonal function. Instrumental function is basically to get others people do something, or request or suggestions or command. Regulatory are used to control what other people do in terms of rules, regulations, and laws. And then finally the interpersonal are establishing or maintaining the relationship. So we see that manipulative functions have three types. Then we have the knowledge of heuristic function here, which has to do with how one extends his or her knowledge to the people around him or her. Then you have knowledge of imaginative functions. Basically, this deals with the creation of language use based on your imagination or imaginary world, or extend the world around us for humorous or aesthetic purposes. The examples, according to Backman, include jokes and the use of figurative language and poetry. Then we have social-linguistic knowledge of genres, dialects, registered, natural or idiomatic expressions, cultural references. But this is the area which has been introduced, and that is about strategic competence, where goal setting, assessment and appraising and planning are the ones which have been highlighted. Goal setting is when you decide the objectives and the tasks required. Appraising is the characteristic of language use or assessment, appraising of our own knowledge, appraising the degree to which the language use or assessment can take place. So that is what basically was the major component which was added here. We also have differences between them. The basic difference is that Celsi Mercia focused on pedagogical, whereas Backman and Palmer focused on the overall and general aspect of the communicative competencies. To conclude, Backman and Palmer's revised model of CLA shows interaction of language knowledge, metacognitive strategies, and effective schemata with each other.